Mm. I love that little thing that when I open up and go live here, I get a little message across my screen that says, "You're live." It's like, oh, I wonder if anybody ever gets, "You're dead. You're not there." So anyway, this is Mary, and we'll be starting here in just a few minutes. So if you're in the classroom and want to get ready, go ahead and, hey, hi, Jan. Good to see you. Thank you. All right. So Jan gets gold stars for jumping in and being the first one on board. And Bettina, two different sides of the country here. And a Facebook user. Am I having stink bug infestations in my part of Washington? No. Either that or I'm just ignoring them. So, oh, Christy, no, I cannot see your name. So I will assume that when the Facebook user posts, it's from you. How are you feeling? I hope you're recovering from your pneumonia and your hospital stay. Okay, just another minute or two. This is an opportunity to ask questions. So Christy's home from the hospital. Yay! That's great news. I hope you're still resting though, that you're not pushing it. I'm glad you're feeling stronger too, because pneumonia is something that does, the minute that 5-day dosage of whatever they give you helps, but it doesn't fix everything. I bet you are tired. Jan's puppy wants to hear our puppy. Our puppy has a new kitten and not quite sure yet if it should play with it or just eat it. And after a week, I'm done playing divide and conquer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. Because what I'm seeing is, I'm not sure if the message is getting across that what your character is missing, what they're lacking, either from their childhood or for whatever reason, that often is part and parcel with their fear, that they're not willing to face that need, not willing to, they have a blind on where they're coping in a lot of ways. But that fear, that lack is what leads to the belief system. And the belief system is what has kept the character moving up to this point of the story, up till the opening of the story. But now they're giving some hard choices that they have to make that is going to challenge how they see things, how they see themselves, how they see others, what they've done up to this point. And that's the whole function of the story, is have them face that particular issue. And what happens if there's one issue is readers are not dumb at all, but we're reading for entertainment. We're reading to root for this particular character to grow and change, even if it's in a series, and thus it's going to take multiple series to actually deal with their big issue. Each book, we want to see that this person did what a lot of us in real life want to do, but they may not be able to do because we don't have the opportunity, or we don't see our opportunities. So determining what your character needs, which more trust, they need a wider viewpoint of the world, that it's not just black and white. They need a sense of security. They need a sense of purpose. Whatever that need is, then is what the inciting incident is going to offer them in a small way. Hi, Louise. Lovely to see you there. So there's a connection between all of these elements, between what they are lacking or what other people might feel that they are lacking. That's why we use that other people's perspective, because a lot of times the individual themselves do not see it. So by notifying the reader, this is what this character is missing, but they don't see it, and combine that with the belief system that the character doesn't even know is operating. It is like that on the computer. There's this stuff that's happening in the background, and that's what's driving the ability to take actions. Most people don't face their belief system until they start to grow and change, and they start to grow and change not when things are good, but when things become problematic and challenging. The more challenging, this is where you find the true person. And this is what we're doing in our stories. So I know I keep harping about this with some people's homework, and thank you, thank you, thank you for posting homework, because everybody can learn from that. But it's about getting clear. What is this person afraid of? And how are you going to make them face that fear? That first template 5, which is a quarter of the way into the story, is their first risk that they're going to take to face that fear without even realizing that's what they're doing. They think they're doing, I'm doing my job. This is my job. I'm going to face it. But with you're starting to force your character into, whether they like it or not, is a realization of what's holding them back. Brenda says it's becoming clearer all the time. And I'm really glad for that. And that's why my challenging you is not to say, no, your story's not going to work. My challenging you is to say, this might be how it's coming across. This might be how that reader might interpret it. And once you know that, then you can, if you want to keep that particular option, direction of your story, then you counter it by having, there's always a way to make it work. But what you don't want to do for your reader is confuse them or frustrate them or lose them because they're trying to figure out who this character is on the page. And if it's somebody that they want to spend time with and understand, even if they're not a likable character, I don't care that nobody likes them. It is that they have empathy with them. Jan says, my problem is trying to put too much in the first book instead of saving some for more books in the series. Exactly, but you learn that. And once you learn that, you start seeing, this is what's tripping me up. I'm trying to cram all the information in high school into the first semester. And yes, in our heads, that's the way it is, because we know that's going to go on. But knowing that you have a trajectory for multiple stories, then you can start placing the lessons learned. All right, so incremental lesson in book 1, incremental lesson in book 2 and 3. If you are writing a longer series, and we'll go into this in the lectures, not this week, but next week, about how you use the templates to actually work on a series. So again, this is that whole, as writers, we're so close to the story. We know in our head what's going on, but we often don't have the ability to step back and see that we're making our character grow too fast, making our character grow too much, having multiple different storylines in the initial books. That you have to have a sense of, it is the graphic that I showed, that you're trying to climb the mountain. You don't go from the flatlands and climb the huge mountain. You don't do that. You do it the hill first, and getting the hill, you go to the next. Now you can face a mountain-ish. And then from that level is how you go to the top of the mountain. So if you're going Mount Kilimanjaro, it takes people a week or two just to climatize to what's considered the lowland in Nepal. And then the Nepalese, the Sherpas, bring them up a little bit and up a little bit and up a little bit, so they're ready with their oxygen to face that big push at the top. I'm the Sherpa, okay? So that's what I'm here to help guide you and to help you as much as I can, not knowing your story, but knowing story structure, how you might be tripping yourself up. So Jan's realization that she was putting too much in the first book, you're not going to make that mistake again. You're going to see, okay, I got to thin things out so that I can really see what this story is about. And that's why, if you're saying somebody has a commitment issue, and then in the first quarter of the book, you're showing them committed to somebody or something, it's like, okay, clearly it's not commitment per se. So, but it might be commitment to a specific other person, or the thought of what that could be. And so I want to really give kudos to those who have been willing to post their homework and get feedback and revisit and then get feedback. But that's the opportunity. That's the whole point of this whole month. So if you don't post, and I'm not saying you have to, but if you don't post and get feedback, you're going to be exactly where you were at the beginning of the month, unless you are one of those amazing students who can get everything you need by reading or listening to the templates. But seeing from how other people are putting their homework out and realizing they have some of it, but they don't have quite all of it, that gives you the opportunity. Bettina says, I like opposite scenarios that played out for James Gordon, the policeman in the Gotham TV series. His lack seems to be a misplaced confidence in the people of Gotham City. Early on, a villain asks you and what army will stand up to him. Gordon says the city will. But when he turns around to rally them, everyone runs away. He then spends 5 years protecting the city. In a very late episode, a similar incident happens, but this time the city is on his side. That city is the threshold guardian, both in the series 1 and series 5. In series 1, it left him standing there and unable to move forward. In series 5, same situation, but now he knows he has the backing because he took those incremental steps in 5 books to bring the city along. And that's how you do a series, is you don't have him solve every problem in the first book, but that leads up and foreshadows that that is going to be an issue. And because it was an issue to the policeman, it also became an issue to the crime fighters. So people with questions, okay, Louise, I like reading how others have used the concepts in homework. There are some good ideas here. Absolutely. And this is where, as an editor or an agent, what happens, you send your project off, they start reading it, they like the concept, they like the idea, they like the possibility, but it's not the structure yet. It's not pulled together into a story that they can actually go to their boss and their boss's boss and say, I think we should purchase this book. And if you think about it, it used to be the average book cost about $10,000 to $12,000 to be published. By the time you pay the editors and you pay the readers and you pay the production team and the art team and the people who make the blurbs and the paper and bind it and send it out, it's about $15,000 to $20,000. That's what you're asking a traditional publisher to do for you. So you have to give them something that they can see the final product is very close. They can't have something that is all over the place. And getting clear, and that's why the first 5 templates are all about clarifying for the reader. This is the issue that they're missing, that they're struggling with, that they're afraid of facing. In template 3, where you go through the pros and the cons, should I act, should I not act? And you're giving the reader, this is risky, but so is this if I don't do anything. And then you give them that choice. The reader sees it. They take one of those 2 choices, understanding the potential risk for it. And only then do they get into the heart of the story. But the average reader is not going to hold on until that point in your story. Now, template 5 is about a quarter of the way into your story. The whole purpose of you determining the word count is so that you can determine what does that play out to on your manuscript. I have that line, but that line doesn't necessarily show you how deep into the story is that going to happen in your particular story. So today, one of the things I recommend doing, this is not a book, but I am going to recommend that you take your book, this is not a very big book, and you are going to figure out that quarter of the way into the story, that word count. How far is it? Bettina asked, is the pros and cons usually one scene, or can it be longer? It should be longer. Think about it. It is halfway from the opening of the book. From the very opening of the book, it is halfway to the quarter point. So if your quarter point is at 20,000 words, give or take, that means it's at around 10,000 words. So it should apply for in that ballpark. So I'm glad you asked that. Christy's saying, does that apply for trilogies, 25% of the way into the trilogy? Trilogies as in 3 different books in the series? This applies, that 25% of the way applies whether you're writing novellas, whether you are writing short stories, whether you are writing 50,000 words or 110,000. It's still the same. The 25% applies to each book in the series. So you write in a trilogy, each book still has that same structure. And that's your first twist point, template 5. Christy's saying each with its own set of protagonist and antagonist. Yes, absolutely. It doesn't matter. So that's why you know the word count that you're aiming for. So I'm not here telling you do it at 10,000 words when you're writing something that if you did it at 10,000 words, that's going to throw your whole structure off. But these things, all right, during our 5-day challenge, I basically asked you one question per day. But those 1 questions per day was how much, left a lot of the details out. This class goes into those details. And I am still only asking about 1 question per template. So it is about getting clearer about the details. Jan says another thing that was recommended after one of your classes in PT was to look at book and see how much was dialogue versus prose. Absolutely. Because if you're in the character's head all the time, it creates more density on the page. Honey, can you get me that book of The Secret Garden? It's sitting in the bedroom there. And then another book next to it, like an Ivan Doig book or anything in there. Okay, for Christy asking, her first book is 160,000 words. That's very long for, particularly from a new writer who has no readership built in. Even if it is a fantasy, it's very long for a fantasy. And okay, this is what I wanted to show you. What Jan was referencing is, all right, here's a book, The Secret Garden. It was done around 1800s or so. There's a lot of this book that is pretty dense. And by density, it means look at the page, how much white space is on the page. Now, here's a book from Ivan Doig. And look at the difference between these two. Book 1, book 2. Now, this typeface is about 10, which makes it very hard for most readers to read, particularly late at night. This book has a lot more dialogue. And what you think about is, think about when you're in kindergarten or haven't really started reading yet. And they had a lot of pictures in the book, and they had a lot of just 1 line or 2 line of dialogue. And then as you get older, you start getting up into the real books with spacing. And no pictures anymore, but a lot more words. Well, the challenge is when you're getting into a book like this is it costs them more to produce. But it also makes it harder for the reader, the average reader, anymore. When do they read it? At night. They're tired. They're not absorbing it. We need to make it easy for them to think, oh, I only have another page or so before the end of the chapter. Now, this page here is right before the end of the pasture. So there's more white space that actually leads the reader into that next. This is the beginning of the chapter down here. So all those things come into play. But what we want to be clear about is much more about the structure. So I was seeing some people's answers, and it sounded like they were jumping from opening, seeing, citing incident to what action are they taking, as opposed to allowing the reader to be guided along with that pros and cons. What should they do? Should they act? Should they not act? And then if you've done a good job there, you're going to bring them up to needing a mentor. And you can have more than one mentor. Think about big decisions that you had to make. To go to college or not go to college, to get married or not get married, to commit to a particular job or not commit. You just didn't stand there in your head and have it going through your head a lot. You talked it over with other people. And it's that talking that allows the reader to see why this character might find the action that they're going to take in 5 problematic. This is where backstory starts coming out. So you have one character who knows the character's backstory and basically let the reader know, I know you don't like this kind of situation. I know you'd rather run the other way, but I also know that once you commit to it, you'll see it through. So that isn't telling the reader as much as foreshadowing for the reader what might happen or not happen. Remember, in commercial fiction, we want to root for this person. We want to make sure that they succeed. We want to see them face hard things, because that gives us as the reader that sense that if they can do it, you can do it. And that's why commercial fiction gives hope. It is not just about understanding what the problem is. It's about creating a sense that someone who didn't think they could face whatever they need to face at the end of the book because of what you showed at the beginning, but they were able to do it. So that means if they were able to do it, then in real life, you can do it, whatever issue you want to deal with. So that's why the reader believes in change. The reader believes that the journey, the process, is worth whatever effort was required. But we don't know that until we're clear about who our protagonist is at the beginning of the story and what it is they're trying to avoid and what inciting incident is going to pull them towards the first big step. Not the biggest, because we got top of the hill, we got the next mountain, and then we got the big mountain to climb yet. But this initially, that character is not going to be ready to deal with those issues. We have to lead them along. So that helps a little bit. And for Christy, who might not be glad to know that 160,000 words might be overwritten for a newer writer, it is just something that we learn. I've worked with people who have written 40,000 words and thought it was a full amateur sleuth novel. And it was like, no, it's not. So people underwrite, people overwrite. This is why being a pantster has a cost to it. Jan asked to Christy, can it be 2 books? A lot of it depends. I have a feeling that because it is a fantasy and there's a lot of world building, that takes a lot of words. So, but the average is about 80 to 90,000 words. So that additional 60, 70,000 might be a part of the second story, or it may be filled with, I'm working with someone now, and in their project, it's every phone call that they make is, instead of summarizing them, it is calling up somebody, hi somebody, I worked with you 8 years ago. I need you to do this. And somebody says, okay, I can do it today. And the person says, all right, I'll meet you in an hour. This conversation that doesn't have to be. So it's a lot of word space that can be summarized and made shorter. So there's a lot of things. Christy says, I've seen epic fantasy, can be 180,000 or more. That type of number can be given to an author who has a readership. This is not yes, you're not a J.R.R. Tolkien or a whatever his name is, George R.R. Martin. And that's why George R.R. Martin was able to, from his last book in the series, it took him multiple years to write. And it just went all over the place, it just blew up. So it's kind of like understanding the word count and understanding the structure feels like it's restraining initially. But think about when you went from not being in school and you got to play all day and you got to make mud patties and get dirty and wear whatever you want, to when you went into school. There were some guidelines for a purpose. And that's what the guidelines are there to help you. Can you break them? Yes. Do you want to break them on your first book when you cannot prove that you have, about 10 to 15,000 followers on social media and some kind of claim to fame that might have people write that for you? You know, or the sense that, oh yes, I know that person, that they're the celebrity, they thing, a lot more people who know the name than know your name. And that in itself causes a whole other range of problems, but we're not going to go into those. Also, I saw, yay, there's Robert. Robert has a great example here. The Philosopher's Stone, 84,000 words. Deathly Hallows, 213,000 words. Difference, the following. Yes, absolutely. You are going to find, Christy says, Diana Gabaldon was told that no one would read an 800-page book. She asked how the publisher knew. They published it, and she's published multiple books at length. Okay, she also started in the 80s, right, when there was more readership available, there were less options for readers to buy or acquire other types of entertainment. She started before there was internet, basically. Or if it was, there was no, you couldn't stream anything on it, you couldn't see movies. So she had a different rule book. So it's kind of like, well, my mother wore this in the late 70s, 1980s. So why can't I wear it now? Well, you can, but you're asking somebody to invest instead of $15,000 to $20,000 in your infant book, your debut book. You're asking them to double that, $40,000 because of the size of the book. Do you want to create those obstacles? It's like going for a job interview. And you get there and they say the job is 9 to 5, and you say, I can't do 9 to 5. I have commitments. So if we can make it start at noon to 8 o'clock, that would work better for me. Do you think you're going to get the job? And you can say it. So particularly as you're starting out, my recommendation is make it easy for them to say yes. You go into the job interview, make it easy for them to say, yes, I want you. So if you're bringing something that is outside the parameters, it's going to say, come home and know what the parameters are. Or you might be, and Christy, I know this is not you, full of yourself and want to prove that you are a writer. And that's too much work for them to deal with. It's kind of like, I was at it was a mostly sci-fi and fantasy conference, and the group of editors and agents, I think there were 4 or 5 of them sitting up front. And some young gentleman said, I love the world building. And it was like, okay, but that's not a question. Did you have a question there? And he said, yeah, I've written, my first book in the series is 600,000 words. And you could see on those editors and agents' face, this person is not ready to be published. This is too much work. And one of them tried to very nicely say why he might want to look at it. Oh, but I don't want to get rid of any of it. And so what they did was say, so-and-so who's not in the room right now, that's the person you need to talk to about this, which was a joke to everybody who understood why 600,000 words was never going to work. But that person loved that part of it, and they loved that world building. So it's not out of editors, agents, and even if you're publishing yourself, you're not publishing for you, you're publishing for the reader. If you have the exception and you stick to it and You may publish it yourself, but then you still have to find the readers who are going to look at the length of that book and say, I'm not going to, I don't have the time to read that kind of a book. But if you've had a couple of books under your belt and you get a following and you get people who want to know the next series that you have, that might be that longer series that you want to do. So, questions about templates you've been working on now. So, if you've been able to keep up, if you haven't been in the hospital, we've dealt with A and B, which is about the characterization and the conflict. What's going to be a challenge for this character? That information then starts being filtering out in template 1, everyday world. And that template is to anchor the reader into who this character is, what challenges they might face because of how they believe about things. And the inciting incident is happening literally right on top of that opening world. But it's so we get to know the reader or the character just enough to say, yes, I want to find out what's going to happen next. And we do that in a lot of ways, raising questions. And if you notice, each of the templates actually raises questions. And you can include that right on the page. But that gets them, they're not going to jump right from, are you going to go investigate this? Even if they've been requested to in that inciting incident, they're not going to do it immediately because they've got other things that they also have to be dealing with. And there's that opportunity to let the reader know from their backstory why taking action is not necessarily going to be easy. It's like us as writers that we decide or we sit down, I'm going to write a book. And then we start writing that book. And then we find out everything we don't know, but not right away. A lot of times we finish the book and we send it off to someone or to someone who will say, consider this, look at that. This might be problematic. Then we go back and we write it again and we rewrite it again. So even people who say, my first book was published, but they don't say it took 17 versions of that book to shape it into a publishable book. The author the whole time was not just sitting there writing, they were meeting editors, they were connecting with other writers, and it's a business, and business is all about the connections that we make. So it doesn't matter if where you are right now, the book isn't ready. It matters if you stop. And it matters if you give up because it is hard. Think about all the, I was reading something the other day, and it was about in the US, we're going to get an increase in Medicaid or Medicare, I can't ever remember which one of those is. And they interviewed somebody, and that person said that she was really hard up, and she was at 67, she was going back to work in order to get money to survive. And then her comment was, I can't, retiring was supposed to be fun. And I thought, It can be, but it's not a given. It's not a guarantee. That first book we write, not a guarantee. Medicare. Thank you, Christy. So in Gloria, your book got to 86,000 words and no end in sight. That often happens with our first books. Join a writing group is a very good thing to do, because then you get the experience from other people around you who might write that same genre, or if not, they still understand the reason we look at word counts, etc. Jen says, once we get this first book structure down, will future books flow easier? It all depends. Okay, here's the good news. The good news is you have these lectures and these Q&As and the material for every book. And you can refresh yourself, and that can help. But if you think about it, if the first book takes you 5 years, that next book, even with traditional publishers, need to be done within a year. So there you process, and then you crammed it down. And if you're indie publishing, that next book needs to be out within a few months, because the readers have been trained that they're going to see. A lot of readers do not trust writers because they've been jerked around too many times in believing, you know how we all get hooked on a series and then there's only 2 books? It's like, well, what? I want to find out what happens. Well, that's the publisher's decision, or it used to be. But for the writer, a lot of readers will not pick up that first book in the series until at least the 3rd book is finished and out there. So it is what publishers have always learned. It's our back stock in our books that sell more than that book that comes out Tuesday. So the more books you have out for readers to make a choice, the more you're going to sell books. If it's a 1-book wonder, there are exceptions, and we hear about those exceptions, but because we hear about them, we think it's the norm, and it's not the norm. Gloria says, I learned I'm not a pantster. Pantsters know how to stop. I've run into quite a few pantsters that do not know how to stop. And they just keep writing because they don't know the story structure. And so they're just kind of, and then this could happen, and that can happen, and this can happen, and oh, there. So Christy asked, so how do you divide time between editing the first book and writing the second book? If we're going indie publishing, what I usually recommend is use an outside editor, not just yourself. And while they're working on that, you're starting that next book and you're moving ahead. And you are, even if you're sending query letters, et cetera, off to traditional publishers, it's usually months and months before you can get a response from them. So if you do it one at a time, you can get a long time before you get a yes. And if you haven't been writing that second book, then you have to drop everything and write it right then. So you plan it like you would a big meal, right? You have the relatives coming over, and you know there's going to be a breakfast, and there's going to be lunch, there's going to be a big dinner, and there's the breakfast the next day. You don't just focus on first breakfast and forget about the rest. You're juggling to build that time in to start writing that second book. And some agents will not even take you if you don't have a second book. And the reason being is because that shows, for all they know, it took 10 years to write that first book. But if you have a second book that you're 2/3 of the way finished, that shows you're in it for a career and not a one-shot wonder. Bettina used to not like plotting structure because I thought it made stories too formulaic. Now I think it will help write faster, fewer rewrites, and I can still keep stories fresh. Absolutely. That's the whole point. The whole point is you need enough to write that book, know it's a solid story, make sure that things that you discovered over the course, you can then go into, it means that when you set something down because life intrudes, you know where to pick it up and go. Brenda says, so should you always have a sequel planned instead of a standalone? Not always. Brenda, you are writing a young adult novel, okay? Some novels, young adult regardless, work for a serial, like a trilogy or something. It doesn't have to be that way, though. You can write that first book that you have to write. Then there might be a character in that story that is the second book, but a whole different standalone. So no, there's no requirement. You always have a full of series. So make it work for you and the stories that you want to write. So as you are writing Michelle's story, be thinking about that next one and what you can do. And you have the templates. So now you're not stuck with just what you've already done or how to clarify it, but you're starting from scratch, which makes it easier. Robert says, a mentor says the money is in the series, especially if you're writing mysteries. Periodically, there are a few mysteries out there that are standalone, but they are not necessarily, they're the exception again, not the rule. So Christy says Nora Robert does most. Every year she publishes a solo. She also releases a book or two that's part of a series. Absolutely. There's a reason that her books sell once every 3 minutes. And she has a gazillion books. She started in category romance, where the stories were a guaranteed audience. People would come to you and say, okay, I want this kind of a story. And they bought it. They didn't care who the name was. A lot of big names authors started that way. But now there's only one category publisher out there. And your book is only going to be visible for 30 days. And then it's pulled and you have no control over it. Nora Roberts now has a lot more control than she used to have. But she played by the rules and the game early in her career and wrote prolifically about these series, and she saw the benefit of that. And then she wanted to move into a romantic suspense and write more single title books. And they let her do that because her name sold the book before the book was published. Robert says, I have 4 YA historical time travel books with his protagonist, but each reads as a standalone as well. And Brenda, you may find that that kind of works for you. But Brenda, your character is, once the reader finds out who that character is at the end of the book, that premise is going to be the next book if you have that particular character. So think of it like, again, the movie The Sixth Sense. Once you reach the end of the movie and know that that main character in that movie, the adult in the movie, is dead, that premise is sailed. It's a given. So the next book that they pick up, it becomes a whole different type of concept because the reader knows that first one that they didn't. So you have to keep that in mind. Brenda says, like doing a sequel to Thelma and Louise. Absolutely. Here, let's have Thelma and Louise as ghosts, and they're going and doing something now. It's like, Christy says, I know what each book in my trilogy adds to the overall arc, but I have certain characters I plan to use for books in the future. Is that info that I should share with a publisher, or do I just present the trilogy without mentioning the future books? Don't get out above your skis. Is that what it is? In front of your skis? When someone, the publisher wants to know you can do those 3 books. Make sure you're not promising and under-delivering. The fact that you're ready to do more in the series is great, because somewhere in the 2nd or the 3rd, if they're seeing that the sales are good, they're going to say, do you have anything else? And you're going to say, I have this in the world of this. And that's a strategic business decision. It makes sense. But you sell one book at a time, truly. You don't try and sell things that are just still theory. It's going to be hard for them to consider it. They're going to assume that you want a career versus a single book, but there's a number of people that want to write that one book. So you meet the current needs of the publisher, and if they're happy with the results and you've been working on the next book in the series. One of the reasons you might not want to mention it too is that you don't want it kind of looped into a contract. Because all of them have to be published through that publishing house, even though it's not the same characters, but it's characters in the world of. And you find that they're putting no effort to promote, which most of them can't. They can't afford to do that, only with their big name authors where they're guaranteed a return. So you're doing a lot of work once those books are coming out and getting the word out and doing that marketing piece. So if your 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th book are also tied up in that contract, you can get stuck. Christy says, oh, good point. You know, this lawyer likes contract talk. Absolutely, but make sure that the contract works for both of you. You can become so excited that someone wants their book that it's basically, I'll give you everything out. And no, you don't. So other questions here. I think I caught up with everybody. They posted homework up to 8 o'clock my time this morning. I think 8 o'clock my time. So depending on where you're living. So if you posted after that, I haven't gotten to it. Or if you posted before that and I haven't gotten to it, it might be lost. I'm really glad Robert caught on to this, is that if you post something and I post a reply and then you post a reply and then there's another reply and then you have a question in there, it means I have to go through all of those to double check. So knowing that it takes longer. It's not just the time to answer questions, it's the time to look at questions. So if you posted something and I haven't seen it yet, repost, because I've caught up as to 8 o'clock this morning. I did 10 o'clock last night and 8 o'clock this morning. That's my time, not yours, except for Jan. So just be aware. Gloria says marketing is really an obstacle for me. I think I haven't even published anything, so what do I know? First, you change the word, because people will give you a lot of, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God about marketing, but it is more sharing with your readers. And if you can think of it that way, how can you share about your stories, but not in that buy my book way, but in a, hey, I found this in my research. Hey, I realized I made this typo or this, whatever it is. So for a call, do I send a direct message set up and can you send me an email? Because that's easier. So just, it's Mary at marybuckham.com. Let's see if I can put this in here. Okay, let's see if it goes. Yay, it came. So just send me an email, because I'm in the email constantly every day with the projects, and it's easier for me to find it. There's just too many ways to have something sit over here in a direct message on this social media or that social media, and I don't see it, and I don't want that to happen. So yes, and it's basically roughly from 10 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, West Coast time. Robert, you're on the West Coast, so 10 to 10, anytime in there. Thursday is out this coming week, but I'm sure we can make it work. So Christy, the same way with you, if ready. And Jan, whenever you're ready too. So I want to make sure that you take advantage of this. There's a couple of folks that I haven't seen post at all this class, or post once, and I don't know if I scared them off. But I want you to take the opportunity, because I'm really not that mean. I know how challenging it can be as a writer, because we give it our all and we put it out there. But the last thing I want to see any of you do is stop, because that's the only guarantee that you will never get published. Christy says you're very scary. Okay. You've been talking to my kids. No, I'm very direct and I don't let things slide, but I'm doing it to help, not to hurt. And if I am hurting, let me know. And I will go curl up in the closet and suck my kneecap. So Louise has a very good point that she reads everyone's posting, and that way you can see that process, that it's like, this answer worked here, but when you change that answer during the story, you have to go back and revisit and see, are you being consistent to that particular? So every time somebody posts and they're on homework 4 or 5 or 6, I go back to the early homework and read them all, so I make sure the continuity, what I'm seeing. So, and learning from each other is brilliant. because most writers only write 1 or 2 books a year. But the more, think of the editors and the agents out there, they're going through hundreds a year. I go through hundreds a year. And that's why I can see things more quickly than you might be able to do so. But it's simply because I've seen more stories. I've seen more speed bumps and am thinking ahead of what you're writing here, how is it going to play out here and here and here? So any other questions today before we sign off? There's going to be, of course, new lectures. And we're going to be looking at template 7, template 8, and I believe template 9 this week. So we got 3 more templates. So we're going literally from just past template 5. And if you don't have subplots or secondary storylines, just go right into 7. That's the to the point of the story. So at the end of this week, you'll be the midpoint of the story going toward the whole moment or the climax of the story. So moving you along. And then next week, we will also be looking at some templates of scene and sequence. So what do you do once you got the big structure? What do you do to get in between? And Gloria says, I'm filling out the templates and then going over the lectures. Good idea or waste of time? The lectures are to help you avoid potential speed bumps. So I would not spend the time filling out the templates and then going and finding out, oh, I had no idea what it really meant. It wasn't clear, the wording might have confused you or something. To me, listen to the template lecture, max it's 30 minutes. And then that's your time filling out the answers. And then you post, you're ready to post. But as you're doing it now, the lectures are there for a reason, and they're to help you understand the concepts easier. That's the same way that the examples of those 5 different movies I analyzed are to help you see the concepts easier, to make it easier for you. But I would not take your time to go answer templates, go to lectures, find out you did it mostly right, but not all, then answer them again, then post. Thank you, Louise, for reinforcing that. So I'm surprised there were no questions about secondary or subplots. Usually that can be problematic, folks. But we will have a Q&A. There's always the hashtag Q to use. Really appreciate that. And I look forward to more postings so we can get you moving along. So at the end of this month, you have the structure of a story ready. So if you do NaNoWriMo, which is starting usually in November, it gives you a jump start. And as you're writing 50,000 words, you're just not writing 50,000 words that might have to be set aside because they went on a tangent. So I appreciate those who signed in this morning, and I look forward to seeing your work in the Facebook group and to seeing you next week. So take care and have fun with your writing. Christy, NaNoWriMo, you just sign up and you just type in the Google NaNoWriMo how to sign up and you'll find out. And what you do is have somebody basically over your shoulder and you check in with them periodically. This is how many thousand words I've done. This is how many I'm going to get 50,000. That's the goal, is that you take the editor out of your head and you're just writing. Okay. So Robert, we're actually going to have a lecture here next week also about romantic subplots or secondary storylines. And we'll go over some of that information. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.